Garden, we're going to be looking at more like shade loving areas. On this one here, a plant I suppose has come back very much into fashion, and that's the hydrangea. I quite like this type of hydrangea, which doesn't have such a big blousy head to them that tend to sort of fall over. There's one type, look really nice, the paniculata type, that will grow up to like 2 metres, more cone shaped. Or you've got this one here, which is like the traditional sort of hydrangea. This one is blue. To keep it blue, you need to give it an ericaceous or acid feed. For height, at the back of the border, I would go for one of the clematis. Most probably go for, I quite like the light bluey colour of this one here. Or you could go for a white. If you've got lots of room in your garden, and I tend to plant 2 or 3 different clematis. Montana is the early spring one, that tends to grow quite rampant, and then you get the main season clematis, and then at the end of the season is one called Viticella, which is the one I used earlier with the smaller flowers, and they'll take you through from August, September into October time. To give you height, and it's Chelsea the other week, every garden seemed to have the foxgloves. This type here tend to flower over a longer period than the more old-fashioned types. A slightly different plant to give you height in one corner, and that's this plant here, rue, or Chinese rhubarb. It's actually not an edible plant, but underneath the leaves is this really nice red colour, so it will form a plant that's about 1 metre across, but it makes quite a good large plant to grow if you're in a slightly shaded position, and it goes really well if you grow this plant here, which are the sort of mid to early summer flowering primulas. And unlike the little wild primroses of springtime, these form spires right through the summertime, and as the season progresses, the spires get taller and taller. So it does look quite nice if you put it together with some of the other, like the rheum. This will ultimately grow up to that sort of height. So at the moment it's a smaller plant, it will eventually grow quite well. Underneath the hydrangea, there's this little plant here. Look at the flowers on that. Delightful little plant. Like, it's a shady area, so if you've got like a tall hydrangea, that will do quite nicely growing underneath it. Another plant for shade is the hostas. Now at this point people say, oh no, with all the rain, slugs and snails. They have found, if you grow the blue hostas, the steely blue ones, they're not so prone to slugs and snails, because slugs and snails don't appreciate the colour blue. So if you're worried about slugs and snails, go for the deep blue one. Having said that, the other night I was walking down to my greenhouse at 10 o'clock, and I heard rustling in the sort of underneath the plants, and I jumped, and it was actually a hedgehog. And I thought, oh brilliant, no more slugs and snails in the garden, hopefully. Another plant, and my gran called these the dancing dolly plants, and these are the hardy fuchsias. This is quite nice, it's got the golden foliage. Winter time they die back to the roots, and then they'll come up again next year. The secret, although they're hardy, if you grow them in pots, to make sure the cold and the frost doesn't get to the roots. When they're in the ground, you've got all the soil around to keep them sort of frost free. But they also in the autumn, don't cut them hard back. In my garden I don't do an autumn tidy, I do a spring clean. So in the springtime, when you see the new shoots starting to develop from the base, that's the time to cut them back. If you do it in the autumn and cut the hard back here, you get the cold, and it goes straight down into the sort of shoots below. Astrantia, this plant here, flowers over a long period. There again, it's such an easy plant to grow, provided there's lots of moisture in the soil, well drained, that will keep flowering for the next sort of 2-3 months. A firm favourite in the gardens are the delphiniums. There again, stalwart at Chelsea the other week, so many of them. I don't tend to tie them up. I go around gardens and they're tied up with canes up the stems, and what happens is the wind blows and it actually breaks the stems. Whereas if you grow them amongst other plants, the other plants support them, and although they might grow at slight angles, the stems don't actually break. And there's this other plant, you don't often see it grown so much in gardens, Veronicastrum. It has spires, these little white flowers, very small, but they'll go up to this sort of height. It's a plant that can go quite nicely in between other plants, and then you have the spires of the white flowers. To go with all this is this plant here, Tirarella. This will flower, well, and they have been flowering from April onwards. Even when the flower's finished, you've got this nice coloured foliage. In fact, if you cut back the flower spikes when they go over, you can then get a little bit of secondary flowers come on them. So this is more or less for a semi-shaded spot with not such bright sunshine. And you can see, even with these plants, you've got nice, good colour scheme. And that will give you colour right through now until the autumn. You might say, oh, I've got this little gap in the middle. What sort of plants can I go for to plant up? So using our same container, this gets used for everything, that container. A plant that does well in the shade are like the begonias. These are not the corn-forming begonias, they're like the bedding plant ones. I quite like it for that orange coloured flowers and the deeper coloured foliage. To go with that, there again we've got this bright yellow petunia. We could also go for this plant here. This is a foliage plant called Coleus. You can actually, at the end of the season, it's not a hardy plant. If in August time you take cuttings of them, you can over-root them and keep them in a sort of frost-free, if you've got a conservatory, greenhouse, or even enclosed porch, you can then pot them up in the springtime. And then this plant here with the bright yellow flowers, bidens or biddens as people call it. And to complement the yellow, go for sort of blue. And all these will flower quite nicely in a little bit of, provided you get half day sunlight, dapple sunlight. So it's quite a colourful sort of tub. One plant I've got to mention, and this plant here is geum. And geum, this is a light yellow one. You get the flowers in orange, reds. Really good doer. Doesn't get any bugs, things like that. And it flowers over a long period. So that completes our flower bed for sort of semi-shaded spot. Remember, this table's only a sort of 1.5 meters across. This would be for creating a border about 3-4 metres in width, so you allow plenty of room for the plants to sort of grow and spread.